morning sun poured through the glass walls of Neurotech Robotics, scattering golden reflections across the lab floor where exhausted engineers stood in silent frustration. The air smelled faintly of solder, burnt circuits, and stale coffee. Monitors flickered with error codes that had become a cruel mantra. System fault. Reboot required. For 3 months, 15 of the company's brightest minds had tried to solve the same problem, a single malfunction that rendered the company's most ambitious creation useless. The AI-driven home assistant named Eve was meant to revolutionize everyday life. It could cook, clean, tutor children, even detect emotions. Investors had called it the future of family care, but the future had stalled. Every simulation failed. Every recalibration crashed. What had begun as a symbol of innovation now stood as a silent accusation in the center of the lab. At the head of it all was Ethan Cole, Neurotech's founder and CEO, a man who once seemed unstoppable. He was 38, sharp-minded and disciplined to the edge of obsession. Yet that morning, he looked nothing like the confident visionary whose name had once graced magazine covers. His eyes were rimmed with fatigue, his collar loosened, and his movements slow with sleeplessness. He had spent the night in his office again, the faint imprint of his laptop's keyboard visible on his forearm where he'd fallen asleep. His team waited as he stared at Eve, running another test from his tablet. The robot's lights blinked briefly, then dimmed. Another failure. A heavy silence followed, punctuated only by the soft hum of machines cooling down. One of the engineers finally broke it. "We've rewritten the neural net from scratch," she said quietly. "We've isolated every variable. It shouldn't be doing this." Ethan didn't respond. He pinched the bridge of his nose, his thoughts spiraling. Each passing hour was money lost, trust lost, hope lost. The board wanted results. The media was circling. Investors were already murmuring about pulling out. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had built this company from nothing after losing his wife 5 years ago, channeling his grief into work, trying to build something that could make life easier for others, something he couldn't do for himself back then. Now it was slipping through his hands. By evening, the lab was nearly empty. The engineers left reluctantly, promising to try again tomorrow. Ethan stayed behind, surrounded by quiet and the glow of blue monitors. He poured himself another cup of cold coffee, pacing between desks cluttered with wires and circuit boards. He couldn't shake the question gnawing at him. How could 15 experts fail to find a simple answer? He stared at Eve's polished chrome shell, its lifeless eyes reflecting his own face. For a moment, the lines between machine and man blurred. Both overworked, both breaking down. Ethan sat frozen for a long moment, his mind trying to catch up with what his eyes had just seen. The robot, which had spent weeks defying every technical fix and every expert's theory, now moved gracefully across the floor, responding to commands with smooth precision. Its sensors glowed a soft blue, the hum of its processors steady and alive. Leo clapped excitedly. "Daddy, it's working. It's really working." His small voice was full of wonder. But Ethan couldn't speak. He just stared at Clara, standing beside him with quiet disbelief of her own. She hadn't meant to solve anything. She had only asked a simple question. Yet that question had cracked a wall that 15 engineers, including Ethan himself, had beaten their heads against for months. He ran his hands through his hair, half laughing, half shaking his head. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. Clara smiled shyly, her eyes wide. "I didn't really do anything," she said softly. "I just noticed that switch said child safety. I thought maybe it was trying not to hurt." "Leo." Ethan looked at her then, not as an employee, not as the quiet woman who watched his son while he worked, but as someone who had just reminded him what real insight looked like. He sat back in his chair, still processing. The engineers had approached the problem as a machine would, through code, logic, precision, endless technical assumptions. Clara had looked at it as a mother would. She hadn't seen circuits. She'd seen intention. "It's protecting itself," she'd said. And she was right. The robot's child safety mode had locked out key motor functions whenever it detected unpredictable movement or sound nearby, assuming danger. It hadn't been a system error. It was doing exactly what it was programmed to do. The irony cut deep. The very intelligence they had designed to safeguard families had been mistaken for failure. Ethan chuckled quietly, shaking his head. 15 engineers with PhDs, and it takes you 30 seconds to figure it out. Clara's cheeks flushed. Maybe they were just too close to it, she said kindly. Sometimes when you look at something too long, you stop really seeing it. Her words struck him harder than he expected, because that was his life in a sentence. Too close to everything, yet missing what mattered most. Leo tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, is Miss Clara going to help you build robots now? Ethan smiled at his son's innocent excitement. She just might, he said softly, glancing at Clara. For a brief moment, the tension that had dominated his world melted away, replaced by something far simpler, a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. The room felt alive again, the quiet hum of Eve blending with Leo's laughter. Clara stood watching, her hands folded, a look of quiet satisfaction on her face. She hadn't done it for recognition. She had just wanted to help. The next morning dawned pale and silver over the San Francisco skyline. Ethan was already awake before the sun, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee. The night's revelation still replayed in his mind, the moment the robot had come to life. Clara's quiet voice, Leo's laughter filling the room like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He glanced at the robot resting on the counter, its polished chrome gleaming in the early light. It was flawless now, responsive, precise, and eerily calm, as if it knew it had finally fulfilled its purpose. But what kept echoing in Ethan's head wasn't the success. It was Clara's simplicity, the way she'd seen what no one else had. For months his engineers had drowned in complexity, while the answer had been sitting right there, hidden beneath the human instinct to overthink. By the time he reached Neurotech headquarters, the building was already alive with murmurs. Word had spread overnight that the prototype was fixed. Engineers huddled around screens whispering theories, each eager to claim a piece of the mystery. When Ethan walked in carrying the robot, all conversation stopped. He set it gently on the main table, its metallic form reflecting the curious faces gathered around. Watch, he said simply. He pressed the power button, and Eve came alive instantly, standing upright, scanning the room, recognizing each person's face with a soft chime. The engineers exchanged stunned looks. The machine that had refused to function was now performing flawlessly. Ethan didn't explain immediately. He let them marvel, let them feel the weight of what they were seeing. Then he turned to them with a calm smile that masked a storm of emotions. The problem, he said slowly, wasn't the machine. It was us. Confused glances darted around. One engineer stepped forward, brow furrowed. But sir, we tested every subsystem, ran diagnostics on. Ethan raised a hand gently. I know. You tested everything except one thing, the part that didn't need coding, the part that required a little common sense. He paused, letting the silence grow heavy. The robot wasn't broken. It was protecting itself. Its safety mode was engaged. And it was doing exactly what we designed it to do, keep children safe. The error wasn't in the system. It was in how we understood it. He looked around at their stunned faces and continued, We've been chasing perfection through data and code, forgetting that the very purpose of this machine was empathy, to understand human needs, not just compute them. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. Some looked embarrassed, others, days turned into weeks, and Neurotech transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The once tense atmosphere of constant, technical struggle had shifted into something lighter, more human. Ethan had followed through with his decision to bring Clara into the company, not as a technician or programmer, but as the official human insight advisor. At first, the announcement had stirred unease. Some of the engineers whispered about it in corners, questioning why a nanny with no degree in robotics or artificial intelligence was suddenly attending development meetings. But Ethan stood firm. He had seen something in Clara that none of them could quantify, a quiet brilliance, rooted not in formulas, but in understanding. On her first day at Neurotech, Clara arrived in a simple beige dress, carrying a notebook and looking as nervous as she was determined. She didn't try to pretend she belonged in a lab full of blinking machinery and humming servers. Instead, she watched. She listened. She asked questions no one else had thought to ask. How does the robot know when someone is tired? She'd say softly.
Can it tell when a person is sad even if they're smiling?
The engineers would look at one another, unsure how to answer. Her inquiries weren't about performance metrics or power consumption. They were about empathy, perception, and the quiet subtleties of being human. And slowly, her presence began to change the way the team thought. Ethan started sitting in on her sessions, fascinated by how she could take complex systems and humanize them with a few words. Once, during a team meeting, she compared the robot's emotional sensors to a parent recognizing their child's moods without words. "We don't measure love in voltage," she said gently. "We feel it. Maybe your robot should too." The room had gone silent, not out of mockery but reflection. Her words carried something rare, clarity wrapped in simplicity. Even the most skeptical engineers began to lean in, jotting down her observations. And when Eve's next version was tested, it didn't just respond faster. It understood better. Its tone softened when a person's voice trembled. It adjusted movements when someone appeared anxious. The breakthrough wasn't in coding. It was in compassion. One afternoon, Ethan called Clara into his office. The window behind him framed the city bathed in late sunlight. And for the first time in years, he wasn't buried under reports or data charts. "You've changed this place," he said sincerely. "You've reminded all of us why we started building in the first place." Clara smiled, modest as the launch was only the beginning. In the months that followed, Neurotech flourished not just as a company, but as a movement that redefined the way people saw technology. Articles flooded in from around the world, praising Ethan's humility, Clara's unexpected insight, and the revolutionary idea that empathy could be engineered. Yet amid all the success, Ethan found himself changing in ways that went deeper than business. He no longer measured his days by meetings or deadlines, but by moments, breakfasts with Leo, quiet walks after dinner, and small, genuine conversations with Clara that reminded him life was more than invention. One evening, the three of them stood on the balcony of Ethan's home, the city lights twinkling below like scattered stars. Leo was playing with a miniature version of Eve, laughing as it followed his voice. Clara stood beside Ethan, a light breeze catching her hair. "You know," she said softly, "I still can't believe." All this started with a question about a switch. Ethan smiled, his gaze distant. "That question changed everything," he said. "It reminded me that sometimes the answers aren't buried in code. They're right in front of us, waiting for us to slow down and notice." She looked at him then, and for a fleeting second, the quiet between them said more than words ever could. As the night deepened, Leo grew tired and fell asleep in Clara's arms. Ethan watched them, a feeling of peace settling in his chest, the kind he hadn't felt since before his wife's passing. He realized that Clara hadn't just fixed a robot. She had healed something broken in him. The home that once echoed with silence now rang with laughter again. Neurotech continued to thrive, its success story becoming legend. But the true miracle had already happened long before the applause and headlines. It was in the moment a nanny saw what 15 engineers couldn't. In the instant, compassion triumphed over complexity. And as Ethan turned off the balcony lights and looked once more at the glowing skyline, he whispered with quiet conviction, "Sometimes the smartest solutions are born from the kindest hearts."